a name forgotten in the pages of history, a journey that could have ended 3 times before reaching its destination. An ordinary man with no special powers, no title of authority, no wealth, just a messenger. But his silent sacrifice ensured that words of hope would cross empires. He carried only a letter, words written on parchment, words that would change the world. Epaphroditus, a name few know, a man who risked everything for a correspondence. He wasn't a warrior, he wasn't an apostle, he wasn't a famous religious leader, just a dedicated messenger, an ordinary man facing extraordinary dangers. What would drive someone to continue a journey after nearly dying once, twice, even 3 times? What inner strength propels a human being to press forward when every sign points to giving up? What letter could be so important to justify such sacrifice? Between Rome and Philippi, between prisons and dangerous roads, between sickness and persecution, Epaphroditus carried much more than a simple parchment. He transported the future faith of an entire community. This story brings a perspective on loyalty and commitment that few know. In the shadows of the great biblical names, there are silent heroes whose discreet actions sustained the pillars of early Christian faith. Epaphroditus is one of them, and his story raises a question that haunts us to this day. How far would we go to fulfill a mission we believe is vital? The year was approximately 62 AD. The Roman Empire dominated the known world with an iron fist. From the arid lands of Judea to the forests of Britannia, Rome extended its relentless power. The Roman roads, paved with stone and advanced engineering, connected distant lands like veins of a vast body. These same roads that enabled trade and communication also served the movement of imperial armies. In a dark cell in Rome, a middle-aged man named Paul was imprisoned, not in an underground dungeon, but in a rented house, chained to a Roman guard day and night. Paul was no ordinary criminal. He was a Jew born in Tarsus, a city in present-day Turkey, a Roman citizen educated in Jerusalem's finest schools. He had been a fierce persecutor of Jesus' followers until a transformative experience completely changed the course of his life. Now this same Paul faced imprisonment for spreading a faith still illegal in the empire. A faith that challenged the worship of the emperor, a faith that attracted slaves, women, and common people, a faith dangerous in the eyes of authorities. Nearly 800 miles away in the city of Philippi, a Roman colony in the region of Macedonia, present-day Greece, a group of Jesus followers gathered in simple homes. Philippi was an important city, positioned on the Via Egnatia, the main road connecting Rome to the east. It was a center of trade and movement. Its inhabitants took pride in their status as a Roman colony, where many military veterans received land after years of service to the empire. The Philippian community had a special bond with Paul. It was the first European city where he established a group of Jesus followers, almost 10 years earlier. Among his first converts were Lydia, a purple cloth merchant, and a jailer whose name history hasn't preserved. When they learned of Paul's imprisonment in Rome, the small Philippian community became deeply concerned. What were Paul's conditions like? Was he in need? Did he have support? Was he sick? Concern soon transformed into action. They decided to send material help and a representative to comfort the apostle. The man chosen for this mission was Epaphroditus. We don't know much about him. We don't know his exact age, his previous profession, his social status. We only know he was respected enough to be chosen as the community's representative. His mission seemed simple: bring a financial offering to Paul and provide personal assistance for some time. The journey Epaphroditus was about to undertake was not for the faint of heart. Even under ideal conditions, a journey from Philippi to Rome took weeks. Bandits frequently ambushed travelers on the roads, even well-patrolled ones like the Via Egnatia. Storms in the Adriatic Sea regularly sank ships. Diseases could strike without warning. And above all, carrying resources to a political prisoner of the empire was not exactly an activity that would seek official approval. Epaphroditus knew the risks, but he also understood the importance of the mission. With the blessing of the Philippian community, he gathered his few belongings and began the long journey toward the heart of the empire, a journey that would test every ounce of his determination. The journey began like many others on the Via Egnatia. Epaphroditus joined a merchant caravan for greater safety. Traders, pilgrims, and official messengers formed a diverse group, offering some protection against the dangers of the road. Philippi fell behind as the group moved westward, toward the Adriatic Sea. The first days passed without major events. The group traveled about 15 to 20 miles per day, stopping at official Roman stations or small villages to spend the night. Epaphroditus remained discreet. He carried with him not only the financial offering from the Philippians, but also news from families, stories from the community, and undoubtedly many questions for Paul. When they reached the mountains of Illyria, present-day Albania, the first threat emerged. The road wound through narrow gorges, creating perfect spots for ambushes. At a sharp bend, a group of bandits attacked the caravan. Screams echoed through the mountains. Merchants tried to protect their cargo, while the attackers advanced with swords and crude knives. Epaphroditus was not a fighting man. On impulse, he abandoned his small bundle of personal belongings and hid among the rocks on the slope, pressing against his chest the bag where he kept the offering for Paul. For hours he remained motionless, praying silently, hearing the distant sounds of the caravan resuming its march after the attack. When he finally gathered courage to come out, he found the road deserted. The caravan had continued without him. He was alone now, without adequate provisions for the mountain journey. The first solitary night on the road was freezing. Without blankets or proper shelter, Epaphroditus shivered until dawn. Exposure to low temperatures took its toll. The next morning, his throat burned. Fever began to manifest. Even so, he continued, one day after another, following the markings of the imperial road, stopping only to drink water from streams or rest briefly in the shade. When the sun beat down harshly, the fever worsened. Each step required more effort than the previous one. It was in the small port city of Dyrrhachium that Epaphroditus nearly met his end for the first time. Staggering through the streets, he could barely stand. His skin burned with fever, lips cracked from dehydration, blurred vision. He collapsed unconscious near the local market. A local Christian family, recognizing the fish symbol medallion that Epaphroditus wore around his neck, took him to their home. For 3 weeks he fought between life and death. The fever consumed his strength. Deliriums made him mumble about his mission, about Paul, about the community in Philippi. Recovery was slow and partial. Still weak but determined, Epaphroditus thanked his benefactors and sought passage on a merchant ship that would cross the Adriatic toward the Italian peninsula. The ship's master hesitated to accept a visibly weakened passenger, but the offer of some extra coins overcame his reservations. The Adriatic Sea is known for its sudden mood changes. What began as a smooth crossing turned into a nightmare when strong northern winds raised gigantic waves. The merchant ship, loaded with oil amphorae, rocked dangerously. Experienced sailors shouted orders, struggling to maintain control of the vessel. For 2 days the storm battered the ship. Passengers and crew took turns pumping out water that invaded the hold. Epaphroditus, still not fully recovered from the fever, worked to exhaustion. When a particularly violent wave hit the side of the vessel, he was thrown against the central mast. Ribs broke with the impact. Searing pain took over his body. It was his second encounter with death. Breathing became agony. Every movement, torture. Experienced sailors recognized the danger of broken ribs. Bone splinters could puncture lungs or other organs. For 5 days, as the ship finally reached the Italian coast, Epaphroditus remained lying in a corner of the deck, motionless, breathing shallowly, clinging to life by a thin thread. The ship finally docked at Brundisium, in southern Italy. From there the Appian Way led directly to Rome. It was the oldest and most important road of the empire, paved with perfectly fitted stones, lined with tombs of important families, constantly traveled by imperial messengers and troops on the move. A compassionate cart driver offered transportation to Epaphroditus in his hay wagon. The journey would be slow. The man stopped at various farms for business, but would allow the messenger to rest. For 2 weeks they traveled northward. The ribs began to heal, allowing Epaphroditus to breathe with less pain. It was near Capua, already in central Italy, that the third encounter with death occurred. A group of Roman soldiers stopped the cart for inspection. They were looking for contraband and mainly fugitive Christians. A recent decree from Emperor Nero had made life for Jesus' followers particularly dangerous in Rome and surroundings. During the inspection, one of the soldiers found the bag with the offering for Paul, coins, and a letter addressed to a prisoner in Rome. Epaphroditus was immediately arrested under suspicion of aiding political criminals. He was dragged to a small local prison, beaten during interrogation, denied food or clean water. For 3 days he remained in an underground cell, dark and damp. His ribs, not yet completely healed, began to ache intensely again after the beating he received. Fever returned, this time accompanied by blood-tinged coughing. In the darkness of the cell, Epaphroditus felt death closer than ever. It was the unexpected intervention of a passing centurion, known for his silent sympathy for Christians, that changed his fate. The officer recognized Paul's name in the letter, not as a common criminal, but as a Roman citizen awaiting trial by the emperor. He ordered Epaphroditus's release, returned his belongings, and surprisingly offered escort to Rome. The final stages of the journey were traveled in silence. Epaphroditus, now visibly thin and weakened, mounted on a borrowed horse, followed the small military detachment. Each jolt on the road sent waves of pain through his body. Finally, after almost 3 months since his departure from Philippi, Epaphroditus caught sight of Rome's walls on the horizon, the largest city in the known world, with nearly 1 million inhabitants, center of power of the empire, final destination of his mission. Locating Paul in the immense metropolis would not be a simple task. The apostle was under house arrest, not in one of the public prisons. After days of discreet inquiries among the small local Christian community, Epaphroditus finally received the necessary information. A rental house in the Trastevere district, guarded by Praetorian soldiers. When Epaphroditus finally crossed the door of the house where Paul was detained, he could barely stand, emaciated, feverish with pains throughout his body, yet a smile illuminated his face. He had fulfilled his mission. Against all odds, the offering from the Philippians and his news would reach the recipient. Paul, seeing the messenger's condition, immediately understood the sacrifice involved. Epaphroditus collapsed, exhausted, finally safe. What he didn't know was that his journey was far from over. What historical accounts don't emphasize is that Epaphroditus not only survived the journey to Rome, he went on to serve Paul during his house arrest. He helped with the apostles' daily needs, carried messages to and from the Christian community in Rome, becoming an essential collaborator. Epaphroditus's condition, however, worsened dramatically in the following weeks. The physical wounds from the journey, especially the broken ribs and recurring fever, manifested in a serious illness that doctors of the time couldn't identify. Paul, in his writings, mentions that Epaphroditus was sick and almost died. This little explored detail reveals something surprising. Even after reaching Rome, Epaphroditus faced his 4th encounter with death, this time prostrate on a bed, with Paul fervently praying by his side. The Christian community in Rome, upon learning of the critical condition of the messenger who had risked everything to reach them, organized uninterrupted prayer shifts. Against all medical expectations of the time, Epaphroditus recovered. Paul attributed this recovery directly to divine intervention, writing that God had mercy on him, and not on him only, but also on me, to spare me sorrow upon sorrow. The most extraordinary part of Epaphroditus's story, however, was about to happen. After his recovery, when he was finally in a condition to rest and enjoy the relative safety of Rome, Paul entrusted him with another equally dangerous mission, to return to Philippi. Not as a simple messenger, but as the bearer of a document that would become a fundamental part of the New Testament, the letter to the Philippians, a document that Paul specifically composed for the community that had sent Epaphroditus, thanking them for their support and offering spiritual guidance. Few know that this letter, now known as the Epistle to the Philippians, was transported by the same man who nearly died several times to deliver the initial offering. Epaphroditus not only inspired parts of the letter's content, Paul explicitly mentions him in the text, but was also responsible for ensuring this document reached its destination. The letter to the Philippians reveals another fascinating detail. The Philippian community was extremely worried about Epaphroditus. News of his serious illness had reached them, probably through merchants or other travelers. Paul mentions that Epaphroditus was distressed because you heard he was ill. This passage reveals that there was an informal communication network between Christian communities in the empire, and that Epaphroditus was deeply esteemed in his hometown. Another little explored aspect of the story is that Paul, in sending Epaphroditus back, was doing much more than simply returning a messenger. He was sending a man whom he called my brother, co-worker and fellow soldier. These terms, in the context of the time, indicated deep respect and recognition of spiritual authority. In fact, some modern scholars suggest that Epaphroditus may have been designated as an official leader of the Philippian community through this letter. The Greek term apostolos used by Paul to describe Epaphroditus has multiple meanings, potentially indicating a simple messenger or someone with delegated authority. This linguistic detail suggests that Epaphroditus returned not just as a letter carrier, but as a recognized leader. The return journey to Philippi is not documented in the scriptures. We don't know if Epaphroditus faced new dangers, if he fell ill again, or if the journey was relatively smooth. What we do know is that the letter reached its destination. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this document preserved today as part of the biblical canon. What makes this story even more extraordinary is that Epaphroditus, after surviving so many dangers on the way there, and presumably on the return, simply disappears from historical records. There are no later mentions of his final fate. We don't know if he continued leading the community in Philippi, if he traveled to other regions, or when and how he died. This historical silence is in itself revealing. Epaphroditus wasn't seeking personal recognition. He wasn't building a reputation. He didn't aspire to become a central figure in the history of early Christianity. He was simply a man committed to a cause greater than himself, willing to give himself completely for something he believed in. Even more significant is realizing that the letter Epaphroditus carried on his return to Philippi is recognized by scholars as the warmest and most positive of Paul's letters. While other Pauline epistles frequently address problems, conflicts, or heresies, the letter to the Philippians is predominantly an expression of gratitude, encouragement, and joy. The document contains some of the most inspiring and quoted verses attributed to Paul, including "I can do all things through him who strengthens me," and "rejoice in the Lord always." The exceptionally optimistic nature of this letter may reflect not only the special relationship between Paul and the Philippian community, but also the influence of Epaphroditus himself, whose example of extreme perseverance certainly impacted the apostle during its composition. What might initially appear to be a simple mission to deliver financial resources proved, in reality, instrumental for the production of a text that would influence millions of people through the centuries. Without Epaphroditus's journey, without his sacrifices and his willingness to risk everything, the letter to the Philippians might never have been written. To discover more fascinating stories like this, simply subscribe to the channel. Epaphroditus's journey echoes through time, far beyond the parchments and ancient pages. His story is not just an account of adventures and dangers from a distant era. It's a mirror reflecting deeply human questions that we continue to face today. What motivates us to press forward when everything indicates we should give up? Epaphroditus could have abandoned his mission after the bandit attack. He could have ended his journey during the illness in Dyrrhachium. He could have returned after the near-fatal shipwreck. He could have disappeared after being arrested and tortured. At each obstacle, the most logical choice would have been to return or simply give up. But he continued, not for personal glory. His name is barely mentioned in historical records. Not for riches. His mission was to deliver resources, not receive them, not for power. Even his possible later leadership position seems to have been more a service than a privilege. He continued because of a commitment to something greater than himself, a concept almost foreign in our era of self-promotion and instant gratification. In a world where we often measure the value of our actions by the immediate recognition they receive, Epaphroditus represents a radically different perspective, that some of the most significant contributions to humanity happen away from the spotlight. How often today do we abandon important projects at the first sign of difficulty? How many noble causes are forgotten because the path proves more arduous than expected? How many vital messages never reach their recipients because the messengers give up halfway? The letter that Epaphroditus carried back to Philippi contained a phrase that perhaps reflects his own experience: forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal. Without knowing it, he became the personification of these words. It's remarkable that one of the most enduring contributions of this ordinary man was simply completing his mission. He didn't conquer lands, he didn't write philosophical treatises, he didn't lead armies, he just delivered a letter. But that simple action ensured that words of hope, encouragement and guidance would cross not only miles of Roman roads, but also centuries of human history. Perhaps Epaphroditus's most powerful legacy is the reminder that the most transformative actions are rarely spectacular at the moment they occur. They are persistent, discreet, often invisible to most. They are daily choices to press forward despite the personal cost. And as for the question raised at the beginning, how far would we go to fulfill a mission we believe is vital? Epaphroditus's answer was clear to the very end. Through sickness, danger, imprisonment and suffering, his determination wasn't based on blind fanaticism, but on a deep conviction that what he carried, both going and returning, was too important to be lost. In a world where we frequently seek paths of least resistance, Epaphroditus's journey remains as a silent reminder. Sometimes, the worthwhile path is precisely the most difficult one. Sometimes, the most important message is the one that demands the greatest sacrifice to be delivered. Sometimes, the greatest heroism is simply continuing when everything suggests stopping. The story of a man who nearly died 3 times to deliver a letter invites us to ask, what message do we carry? And more importantly, are we willing to complete the journey, no matter the cost?